space. I'm just be really curious to know how you define introvert.
Okay. Now, there's definitely a lot of misunderstanding about it for sure. What I say is we're deep thinkers.
G'day, I'm Peter Anthony. Welcome to Growth Tales. David Hall is an expert on introversion. Expect to learn why introverts sometimes get a bad name, the superpowers of introversion, and what to do if you happen to be shy. Here's David's story. G'day, David. How you going?
Hey, it's good to be here, Peter. Thanks for having me on today.
Absolute pleasure. You know why it's such a pleasure? Because I'm endlessly fascinated with this whole idea of introversion and introverts. And I thought it might be useful just to clarify, how would you define an introvert? I mean, you're a world leader and an expert in this space. I'm just be really curious to know how you define an introvert.
Okay. Now, there's definitely a lot of misunderstanding about it for sure. What I say is we're deep thinkers. And then some
Okay.
people are also deep feelers. They're empathic.
Yeah.
They could be both a deep. In my case, I'm a deep thinker, but I know lots of people that are also deep thinkers and deep feelers, and that's a big part of the definition. And a lot of times I hear people say, "Well, the main difference between introversion and extroversion is how they get their energy." There's
Yeah.
truth in there,
Yeah.
but I think if that's the only definition, it's very lacking.
Yeah.
I think that I'm a deep thinker. Sometimes I do need to recharge. Oh, and the other part of the definition they say is, and they recharge by being alone, and extroverts recharge by socializing.
Yes.
And again, those things are true, but it's not the full picture.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
as an introvert, as a deep thinker, I do need some time to recharge. And I say I need some recharge after certain situations and certain people, right? It's not
Yeah.
all people. It's not all
Yeah.
people. And, sometimes I'm really going to enjoy this conversation with you. I might need a break after. I might not. I might just feel recharged by it, just depending on the topic.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is it goes beyond that. We need time alone for lots of things. We need time alone to think, to make some plans, to focus on some work. So, as a deep thinker, and there's a lot of great strengths with that. I'm very analytical. Other introverts have different strengths. And
Yeah.
because we're deep thinkers, lots of strengths come with it. And we just need to understand that. And there's so many myths, and we can get into that today about
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
introversion is, what introversion isn't. But I'll say introverts can do whatever they want. Their just strategies might be different. It might look different how they go about something. And probably the two biggest myths, and we could talk about more. Probably the
Yeah.
two biggest myths is that introversion equals shyness. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Either introverts or extroverts can be shy. Um, I say that I was shy when I was younger because I didn't understand my introversion. I didn't understand that I was a deep thinker, that I usually think before I speak. And that's a very natural process for me. Um,
Mm.
and the good news is, if you're shy, either introvert or extrovert, you can learn ways to get confident. But
Yeah.
it definitely doesn't equal shyness. And the other big myth is that we don't like people. And I think that there's
You're not very
very,
friendly.
yeah. I think and we're about half the population. So I think it's a very small percentage out there that don't want any human contact. I think, I don't know what the percentage is, but maybe it's less than 1%.
Yeah.
Almost everybody likes people. It's just, it looks different, how much people interaction we need and that kind of thing. And yeah, there's so much that we could talk about around those things.
Yeah. 'Cause I was reading an article in the Journal of Psychology, and what they were talking about was it's more relevant now to talk about people being ambiverts, not introverts or extroverts, because it's likely each of us have an introverted aspect and an extroverted aspect. It's going to depend upon things. Like you mentioned some great things there. It depends on how I'm feeling. It depends on who I'm talking to. It depends on like what the topic is. It's going to vary. You would say, I'm always extroverted or I'm always introverted. Like if you're a deep thinker, you're thinking, well, I'm not going to be deep thinking all the time. There's going to be some times when
Well,
you might just get a bit light and just want a bit of a break from deep thinking, right?
yeah. And when I talk, you'll hear me say things like usually, generally.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I personally don't use the term ambivert because
No, okay.
my core, my preference is that I naturally go into my inner world, my imagination,
Yeah,
and it a lot of times what I when I hear people use the word ambivert, what I usually hear is that they say that, I need my time alone, but I also like people. And I'm
yeah,
like, well, if that's the definition, then I'm an ambivert or extrovert,
yeah,
because I
yeah,
like people.
yeah,
But it's about preferences, it's like, what do I usually do? And most of the time, I'm gonna drift inward. I'm gonna,
yeah,
spend some time alone. I'm gonna need some time alone for all kinds of different things. And of course, again, we could do anything. I gave a speech today and I talked about how I love it. But I've learned that my approach to it just looks different. The way I prepare is going to be different than an extroverted friend. So, I say my preference is introversion for sure. And
yeah.
then
Okay.
we do all kinds of things. And I don't call any activities extroverted. I just say I'm an introvert. I love giving public speaking, but I need to prepare differently.
Yes, and maybe a more introverted person might find that a bit more exhausting, and they might need to like a recharge afterwards, like get back into that deep thinking. So it's hard to be deep thinking and talking at the same time.
Yeah. And I think you
Yeah,
hit on something, right? That's what it is. It's like people are going to vary in how much they are going into their inner world and how much they're paying attention to what's going on around them. And so
yeah,
that's where, but I think you do have a preference. Most people are going to have a preference one way or the other, what they
yes,
mostly do.
yes. It's interesting too. I was working with a group of engineers in the UK recently, and these engineers wanted to learn how to connect better with clients because they had like client manager and client service roles in these big jobs, and these were very deep thinking introverted engineers, right? And highly specialized skills that they'd spent 20 years pretty much alone studying, and they quite liked it. They quite liked that studying, that not just the deep thinking, but they enjoyed the expertise that deep thinking generated.
Yeah.
It's challenging to become an expert on something unless you spend a lot of time deep thinking, studying, and analyzing it. And they found it endlessly fascinating. These are people that would spend a decade studying how liquid travels through a pipe, for example, and how much the pipe vibrates as the liquid's traveling through it. They found that fascinating, right? Now, it's good there's people like that. You think,
Yeah, I
well,
was just going to say that. Yeah.
you think, well, how relevant is this? That was the question I asked. I thought, I'm just curious, how is that relevant? And the answer he gave was that there's a lot of like natural gas pipes around the world that need to travel through marine parks and marine reserves. And how much the pipe vibrates as the liquid or gas is traveling through it has an effect on the reef fish and the environment. And he cared a lot about the environment, and he loved understanding whether or not this particular pipe would impact that environment. Plus, it meant the the client could get approval for the project that was being proposed, for example. So it was deep thinking. He loved how things travel through pipes, which is great. But it also had like a social or a pro-social outcome as well. That's what he was doing. And when I got a chance to understand that, I thought, wow, I really respect this. I
Yeah, you
respect.
said it. It's like we need people to do that, and we need people to do all kinds of things. And likely something like you just described, they probably, are an introvert, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we need introverts to do that deep thinking to come up with creative, innovative
yeah,
solutions.
yeah,
And we need everybody. Everybody has their different strengths and skills, but I'm glad that somebody's doing that, just like you said.
Yeah, I'm glad someone's doing it. And you think of all these niches, like this real expertise, whether it's expertise in AI or engineering or geology or whatever it might be. You think it's very likely it was the introverts that were thinking very deeply over a long period of time in this very specific area that developed that expertise that we can all enjoy and share. So you think, well, that's a superpower, if you like, or is something that introverts are contributing to the world over and above their extroverted colleagues. Not that this is an extrovert bashing session.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. You talked about the people part. And I'm curious about your thoughts on this, because traditionally extroverts have been named like the people, the people that like people and that are very gregarious and chatty and funny and cracking jokes and life of the party. Right? You think, well, that's one type of being social. But it seems like an introverted way of being social is not talking to 100 people, but maybe having fewer, deeper relationships with less people, like more worthwhile, deeper, connected relationships. Would you say that's the case? Does that come with the deep thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple different things. We definitely we thrive often in one-on-one or small group situations.
Yeah.
And it's not that we don't like people. It's just I use the example of a networking event.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
say you walk into a networking event and you don't know anybody. The extrovert is it's gonna want to meet everybody really quickly. I've been with an extroverted friend that just really was interested in meeting everybody, and that's never going to be me. So not only it's not effective for me in building relationships, it's draining. And what I need to do in that situation is have a goal, you know? What do I want? And that's what this whole conversation really is. What do you want and how are you going to get there with your personality strengths? So what
Yeah.
do I want? And, if I talk to the right people and I have a couple really good, deep conversations, I might be satisfied, where the extrovert might not because they wanted to meet all 100 people kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And potentially you at that networking event might talk to two people, but you may build better, stronger, deeper relationships with those few, where the extrovert might have like very more surface level conversations with a lot of them. So if the introvert picks the right people in that networking event or happens upon the right people, it might be more valuable to be introverted at a networking event.
Yeah, yeah,
Couldn't
absolutely.
it? Yeah, yeah. You
And
you go.
yeah, sometimes as an introvert, you might be the life of the party, but it just has to be the right party.
Okay,
It
a small
maybe
party.
yeah, it's maybe a smaller party. People
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
all depends. And we really do like to go deeper in conversations. I used to have a really hard time with small talk because I
yeah,
honestly, it wasn't getting to the deeper conversation I wanted to have. I've since learned how to do it much better. I enjoy
yeah.
it sometimes, but it really helps build relationships to get to those deeper conversations.
Yes,
I
yeah,
think that for me, I just don't want to get stuck there. I don't want to have just lots and lots of excessive small talk, but it's good to have to build those relationships. But
yes,
that's a lot of it is we want to go deep into conversations, and we want to we do want to be social, but it might look different. Sometimes we're going to need to recharge.
yes,
I was
yes.
on I was on somebody else's podcast, and it was a husband and wife, and they talk, and their thing is that they were opposites. One is an extrovert, one was an introvert, and the wife said,
Yeah,
"My husband doesn't like to go dancing with me." I'm like, "Okay, tell me more." And she's like, and he said, "Well, at 12 o'clock, I love going dancing with my wife, but at 12 o'clock, I'm done. At 3 a.m., she's just getting started. So it's just kind of a different in perspective.
Yes, yes. Yeah, you talked about small talk there. I guess if I'm an introvert and I'm meeting strangers, and you think everyone in your life, with the exception potentially of your parents or maybe your siblings, were strangers before you met them, right?
Right.
Everyone started off as a stranger, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Even some great friends you might have for 20 or 30 years, you started off as strangers, and it's likely it would have begun with small talk. It wouldn't have begun like a very deep existential conversation straight away. You'd be thinking
Right. Right.
it warms to that. But I guess what you're saying to us, David, is that introverts prefer to get into the deeper end of the pool a bit quicker than maybe the extroverts do, who will just stay on the surface for a little longer.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah. And I mean, extroverts like deep conversations too. I think it's like they like all conversations,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
small talk is fine. And introverts, we don't like it as much.
Yes. Yeah.
And we struggle with it too, because a lot of this conversation is, as an introvert, we naturally think and then speak, and we share what we think is most important. The natural process for extroverts is to generally think out loud, and
Yes.
they
Yeah.
share most everything. And when you don't understand that, there can be a lot of confusion. And so if you're trying to think on the spot and you're in a new situation with someone you haven't met, it might be tough to come up with topics to talk about, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it can be helpful. And I don't, I'm not going to say you can prepare for everything in your life, every conversation, but you can think ahead of time if you're going to an event, hey, what's some things I could talk about? Or you can pay attention to things that are going on in the environment and come up with things to talk about. But that's why we struggle with small talk, is because we're not good at always thinking on the spot,
Yeah.
situations that
Yes.
we haven't been in before.
So the introvert is more likely to be thinking first and then talking,
Yeah,
whereas the
yeah. And
extrovert's more
not,
likely to be talking first and then thinking.
yeah. That was one of my big epiphanies when I learned to embrace who I was, oh, okay, that's a good thing, and it's not going to change. The other thing, Peter, it's crazy. Like, I think I talk tons compared to what I used to be. But
Yes.
another epiphany was, I am never going to talk as much as an extrovert, and people might still call me quiet, even though I think I'm talking a lot,
Yeah.
because I'm always going to think and then speak. Um, it's interesting, and I said this to you before we started recording. Um, if you're asking me about something that I've never ever thought about before, I'm gonna need to think. But
Yeah.
if you're talking to me about something I've given a lot of thought to, like introversion, I could talk all day long, without being prepared. And there might not be that pause of thinking and then speaking, because it's just it's on the surface.
Yeah, it almost seems to me, and the introverts I've met, because I spend a lot of time coaching like technical skill professionals, like engineers, accountants, lawyers, who are primarily introverted. I haven't done assessments on them, but that's my impression of them when I meet them. And there seems to be a higher duty of care, I find, when I'm dealing with introverts. They have a higher duty of care about the integrity of what they're saying, the integrity of what they're doing, the integrity of their thoughts, and sometimes that integrity gets in the way, because it's almost they want to get it right before they say it. But sometimes you get it right while you're saying it, or while that meeting or conversation is taking place. And one of the things I encourage introverts to do is to speak up just a little bit earlier, even when the thought's not fully formed, because
Yeah.
it may form in the process rather than you waiting for it to be perfect, and then allow people to access your wisdom, because while you're waiting for it to be perfect, the moment might have passed when that thought could have been really useful. Does that make sense?
It's a real struggle. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so we are, you ask me something, I'm starting to think. The
Yeah.
ideas are rolling around in my head, and I do want to come up with the perfect response. And
Yes. Yeah.
so there's lots of things you can do. I mean, you can definitely prepare ahead of time. If we're talking about a meeting situation, you can
Yeah.
get the agenda, see if there's any research you need to do. There,
Yeah.
you can make your own little agenda, like, okay, what do I need to research? Is there points I want to make? You can do all of that. But at some point, you do have to realize, okay, this is the best answer I'm going to come up with.
Yes. Yeah.
I will also say, again, the meeting situation, you do want to speak early, like you're saying, and also get your thought out in that meeting. But I think we also, if where possible, also allow introverts to come back after the meeting. And that's not the ideal to me. The ideal is, when the conversation is happening, give your
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
response. But where possible, let the introvert come back after and share some thoughts,
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
the decision's made, kind of thing. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
a real struggle where, we're trying to get out that perfect thought, and it's not always possible.
Yes, yes. Particularly, like I guess in a group environment, like a meeting environment, where there might be, I don't know, 10 people in the room, and they're going through a structured agenda or a review or an update or whatever it might be, and the introvert is often the last one to be speaking up, usually. And you think, well, and they don't feel as comfortable. It seems introverts don't feel as comfortable in those group situations. It was one-on-one potentially, but the more people in the room, the less comfortable they seem to be voicing those views or voicing those opinions. And maybe you mentioned an interesting word earlier too, David. This getting it perfect. I'm wondering if being an introvert is correlated with perfectionism. Do, would you say introverts are more likely to be perfectionistic as well?
Not sure, but maybe.
No,
But
maybe.
definitely, but definitely, since they're not sharing everything, when it comes to that, I think that we probably are more perfectionistic because the extrovert's sharing everything, so there's going to be good and bad in there, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the introvert, since they're not sharing as frequently, they want to get it as perfect as they can. And
yes,
again, I definitely, you do need to speak early. I
yeah,
do believe that as an introvert, you can gain confidence by understanding how you operate, by
yeah,
preparing ahead of time as much as you can, but also just realizing that you have given things a lot of thought and you have a lot of important things to say, and you
yeah.
need to speak early so the conversation hasn't already really progressed and your thought isn't considered anymore because others have shared before you.
Yes. Other introverts have shared before you, or the
Yeah,
conversation has moved on. It's made a decision. Now it's the next topic, and
yeah,
you haven't made that really crucial contribution. And that's your job too, right? I mean, I think it's useful to be empathetic and understanding of introverts. But I guess introverts also need to understand that they do need to make that contribution, whether they
yes,
feel 100% comfortable or not, because it's likely most people in that room don't feel 100% comfortable with the topic that's being discussed. It's
right.
no, if there was a really simple, easy answer, you wouldn't need a room full of people to be talking about it, right?
Good point. Yes.
You'd be thinking, well, the reason we're discussing this is we need various perspectives. The other interesting thought I had as you were just talking then too, David, is this whole idea of wisdom of a crowd, and that's this idea that like a smart, well-formed team makes a smarter decision than its smartest member, and well-formed means it's diverse. There's different perspectives in the room, and the idea is that if when you've got different perspectives and the team is well-formed in terms of diversity, and it's got a way of making a decision, that diverse thinking is partly, say, one aspect of diverse thinking is introverted thinking, that deep thinking, and getting that on the table so that then the group or the team can make a smarter decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And often the best decisions are made by, a bunch of ideas coming together.
Yes.
I will say, um, and likely extroverts are going to actually need that group brainstorming. Um, I've definitely benefited from group brainstorming, but I also want to be acknowledged for things that I do come up with on my own,
Okay.
spending time, whether it's an idea driving into work and I have this great idea while I'm in my car. I think it's both. So like I really value the team and group types of things, but also introverts can come up and extroverts too can come up with some great ideas on their own, and we have to look at both.
Yeah. Look at both. Look at that whole range of aspects. So, what would you say the biggest weaknesses of introverts are? Like in your experience, because you're working with introverts all the time, right?
Yeah.
I don't want you to like give us too many like insider tips. I'm just wondering, what would you say are the most consistent weaknesses that introverts might have?
Okay, so about half the population are introverts,
Yeah.
and definitely I know some very confident and outspoken introverts. I know some introverts who have always known who they are from the time they were born. I've known some others that, like myself, have had to come to learn to embrace it. And there's some other people that haven't embraced it. So there's a couple different types of weaknesses. So a weakness for me, several years back now, was not understanding my introversion. Okay.
Okay.
So there's introverts out there that don't understand, hey, I think before I speak, and my friend here is speaking in order to think. If they don't understand, that can be a problem.
Okay.
So not understanding is a problem, but not a problem for everybody. I think just acknowledging that I do need to think before I speak. That can be, you know, it's it's not. It is a weakness, that I can't always think of anything on the spot, but there's strategies around that, you
Yeah.
know, that I can't always come up with something. And like I said, never going to talk as much as an extrovert, but that's not necessarily a weakness.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's
So
see.
you'd say that the first weakness of introversion would be not recognizing it, and the second would
For
be
some,
for some, and the second would be not accepting it. Once you've recognized it, not saying, "Hey, this is okay."
yeah,
It's more.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
more.
that
It's actually
definitely,
more than okay. It's a
yeah,
superpower in some ways.
yeah. There's superpowers that come with it,
Yeah.
and so just kind of understanding that how you operate. So there's not necessarily a weakness. Like I said, you can get whatever you want out of life, but sometimes you have to understand your natural abilities
Yeah. Yeah.
that you're not going to really change.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember many years ago when I first started consulting in the HR space, there was this whole idea about rounding people out, right? Which was about like understanding what people's strengths were and then rounding them out by giving them a job that was the opposite to their strengths, right? So if you weren't good with detail, they give you a job that had a lot of detail in it, so you could learn detail, right? Or if you were really introverted, they give you like a sales role, so you could learn. And the whole idea was to round people out, right? And you'd have like these big like strengths assessments and work out where your strengths and weaknesses were. And what you've got to do, David, is you've got to work on those weaknesses, right? And get a more rounded David. And
Yeah.
I was surprised. When I first I came across it. I was amazed. I thought, really, is this? And I was still relatively young and inexperienced. So, is this how it's done? You get rounded out. It sounds. It didn't work, by the way. I think it was just like a HR strategy that kept HR employed for a period of time. Because rounding people out takes a long time, right?
And it's the worst. It's the worst approach. We
Yeah,
need to really recognize what we're good at. And I'm a big picture person, and
yeah,
the details kind of fall into place.
yeah,
But I know people that can really, that is they're really good at the details. I'm not saying I'm not, but that that's their focus.
Yeah.
And, to try to make me just be a detailed person. In fact, in college, I started out as a computer programmer, and then I soon figured out the details all day long. That's not going to be where I'm going to be effective or happy,
Yeah.
and we really need to look at where we're going to get most return on investment is working in our strengths. And if
Yes.
we can
Yeah.
work in our strengths most of the time, that's where we're going to be most effective.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Marcus Buckingham?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
he did a lot of work with strengths.
Put your
He
strengths
still
to work.
does.
I think put your
Yeah,
strengths to
yeah,
work.
that's
I
one
think
of his
that
books.
was one of the books. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's recently done something called Love and Work, and he
Yeah.
talks about if you can work in your strengths most of the time, that's the ideal. There's
Yeah.
always going to be something that you don't like to do or you're not particularly good at that you have to do in your job. But if we can spend the majority of our time working in those things that we have strengths in, that's where we're going to be the best, be the most efficient, be the happiest. Because in our weaknesses, we are going to be drained.
Yeah, yeah, we're going to be trained. Yeah, it was. I really liked his work, and I liked one part I remember from Marcus Buckingham was he was talking about strengths is not necessarily things that you're good at, but things that make you feel strong and good. They
Yeah.
nourish you when you do them because you think there are some things that you may be good at that you actually don't like because
Yeah,
right,
that's true.
and
That's true.
and that was true of me in my early career. There were things that I was doing and a career path I went down that I really didn't like. And that was a sales career path. And I was sort of pushed and prodded and given financial incentives to spend more time in sales roles. And I really didn't like it. I happened to be good at it in a bizarre way because I didn't like selling. I liked collaborating with people. I got better sales results, but I was pushed further away from collaborating and more into selling, which wasn't collaborating. So it was weird how that worked. And you think, well, we'd all be better off if we focused on our strengths, correct? Because we're all contributing
Yeah.
something unique to that particular world that we live in, whether your world's a family or it's a town or a business or whatever it might be. Is that how it works?
Yeah. And when you were in sales, I'm just curious, was there a certain kind of like template you were supposed to follow? Like this is the way to do
Yeah,
sales?
absolutely. In fact, it was at IBM. I joined in the days when IBM had 1 year of sales training, right? And it was my first job
Wow.
out of university. It was the reason I went there was they said, we're going to give you a year of training. And so you're going to learn how to sell and we're also going to teach you IT and computing. I thought, wow, they gave you a car. My mum was saying, oh, that's great. You get a car. They're paying like twice as much as any other role I was going for at the time. I was 21, 22 back then. And the strange thing was that they gave you a senior salesperson to work with, like to be your mentor. And straight away, like, almost from the moment I joined, Rod and I, the mentor I had, we were selling a lot and I was selling a lot. And I found the more I followed the process I was being taught, the less I sold, right? So I was like a maverick, but they couldn't ignore me because I was selling a lot, right? Or I wasn't actually selling. Clients were buying from me, which is very different than selling. And they're buying from me because I cared and I worked really hard and I cared about them. And I basically just positioned IBM as an organization that could give them what they wanted. But the more successful I got at that, the more I got like bigger sales targets, sales teams, and I liked it less and less because I could collaborate less. And I was encouraged to sort of not necessarily do what was in the best interest of the client. Because I remember
Yeah, and that part didn't sit well
it
with you.
didn't sit well with me, and I knew it, and I knew it didn't work. Because I remember one of
Yeah.
my bosses saying to me, Peter, who are you working for? And I said, I'm working for the client, right? Because I find when I'm working
Yeah.
for the client, I'm more successful than if I'm working for IBM. I happen to be working for IBM, but I'm really working for the client. And I want them to feel that and sense that. I want them to feel that and make it really obvious to them that I'll walk away if we can't do something that works for them. So it was a real conflict
Yeah.
because it was like my strength. My strength wasn't selling, but I was sort of pushed into that environment, pushed into that. And I'm curious about whether, like, I'm sure other people like that could be listening to this might be in that situation too. They could be introverts that are being sort of pushed into environments where they feel less comfortable. And you think, well, maybe a little bit of discomfort's okay, but only you know how you feel, right? Only you know what your strengths are. And maybe encourage them to embrace that introversion. Say, hey, I'm introverted. That's great. I love this. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really just what you were describing. You did it in a different way.
Yeah.
And I've heard from many successful salespeople that are introverts, just they're going to need to use their strengths to get there. The way they build relationships is going to be different.
It's different.
And if that's okay, you can be wildly successful, like you were describing. But if you're following a certain template, it might not work for you, and you might be miserable and not effective.
Yeah, miserable and not effective. Yeah, not effective for anybody. Not effective for IBM. Not effective for the client. Not effective for you. It's also just being disingenuous too, right? It's not being honest. You're
Yeah.
I mean, we all put personas on and we all put like a face on, but there can't be too much of a gap between how you're turning up or how you present yourself at work to how you really are. The bigger that gap is, the more unhappy and stressed you're going to be. I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Introverts too. And I'm not even sure, in having this conversation with you, whether I'm an introvert or not, because I think I'm an introvert, right?
Yeah.
Because I do think, when your definition, I do think very deeply about things, sometimes far too deeply than's required. And often I need to think less deeply because I'm digging way too deep into this. I don't need to get that deep.
Yeah, and Peter, we've talked before. You need your time. You need your time alone.
Yeah.
You need to spend time with your friends and family.
Yeah.
That can be an introvert.
Yeah, become an introvert. I'm just an introvert that likes asking questions and listening to the answers, right?
I love asking questions.
And listening to the answers. I'm going to learn stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
When people talk to me, I probably ask them too many questions.
Yeah.
That's from my introverted nature.
Yes, and my mother taught me that when I was quite young. I was very introverted, and I would stay in my room and read books, and my family would come over, like her brother and his family, and I didn't want to come out and talk to them, and I wanted to stay in my room. She said, "You can't do that. You're rude. This is your uncle," and the trick she taught me, I would have been about, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years old. The trick she taught me was just ask questions. Come out and just ask your Uncle Harry questions, like how he is, how was his experiences at Lumberjack. Just ask him questions and listen to the answers. I found, as an introverted kid, that worked really well. Just ask questions.
Yeah.
Because, and the amazing thing I find, David, is so few people do that. They're like giving you, like you might spend an hour with somebody and you'll ask them questions and they won't ask you a single question back again. They'll just.
Right.
I think that's the tip I'd give introverts. Not that I'm an expert on introversion, but that's the thing I'd suggest. If you are socially or professionally awkward, just ask questions and listen to the answers. And then you'll do your deep thinking. Then you can learn from what you're hearing and haven't got to do too much talking.
Take a genuine interest in that person. Just really be interested, and you'll go far with that.
So what you're saying is that introversion's not one thing. There's different varieties of it. You're a deep thinking introvert. Is that how you describe yourself?
I think all introverts are deep thinking.
Yeah, okay.
I think there's different facets to our personality. Like, we mentioned a couple of them, like, and with 50% of the population, we're not all alike. You can't stereotype half the population.
Yeah.
But, where I mentioned, somebody might be more in touch with their feelings, be, empathic.
Yeah.
Also on my show, I have a lot of people that are highly sensitive, and that can be an introvert or extrovert, but it really plays into your personality.
Yeah.
How you're sensitive to your environment. I happen to not be highly sensitive, but it's still really important to have these conversations to get to know other people. There's people that are, I mentioned big picture or details.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of nuances to our personality. I just think that introversion and extroversion, that dichotomy is there's a lot of misunderstanding. So even though I'm very interested in all the different personality aspects and different strengths that we have, my my focus is introversion extroversion because that's definitely misunderstood. And like in my case, where I used to be shy, I'm not anymore, and I've really learned some strategies to be successful.
So if I'm a shy person, like you said, you used to be shy. I'm not shy anymore. What would be your not shy guidebook? So, like, if you're shy, and assuming you might be introverted and shy, it's very unlikely a very extroverted person would also be shy. They probably wouldn't correlate. But if I'm a shy person, how did you overcome shyness? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, and I mean definitely extroverts can be shy, but I
It's less likely.
I think it's different,
Yeah,
and I feel worse for them. You know,
yeah,
I feel worse for the extroverted shy person. But I think everybody can gain confidence.
yeah, yeah,
So, why is your confidence lacking?
yeah,
In my case, it was the fact that I'm thinking and then speaking. Somebody else is talking a lot,
yeah,
and they're saying things like, "Why are you so quiet?"
yeah.
No introvert likes to hear that, by the way. Why are you so quiet? Because it's hard to come back from that. I'm like, no, I'm
I'm
not.
not quiet.
But
I'm thinking. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's very,
yeah, I'm
very, it's
thinking.
very noisy on the inside. I might be quiet on the outside,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
very noisy,
right,
very
right.
noisy up here.
Yes,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is. It is. So for a lot of what I did to overcome shyness and gain confidence was understand who I was, understand my unique gifts. That I'm very analytical, and I think all introverts are deep thinkers or go inside, but the analytical abilities are going to be different. So that's a strength of mine. And I'm not bragging, I'm just saying that's a
yeah,
strength of
yeah,
mine. There's a lot of strengths that other people have that I do
yeah.
not,
It's
so
calling it as you said. That's what it is. I mean,
yeah. And
like Patrick Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks of all time. That's just what it is.
yeah,
That's not boosting him up. That's calling it how it is. Roger Federer is one of the best tennis players of all time, and
yeah.
it's yeah. That's just calling it how it is. So you'd say what if I'm shy? You'd say what? Be okay speaking up.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, so get to know yourself,
yeah,
get to know what you need,
yeah,
get to know your strengths. Don't compare yourself to others,
yeah,
but realize, you know what? I have a lot of good things going for me,
yeah,
and what I have to say is valuable. Change the messages that you're telling yourself.
yeah,
Whatever it is that is making you feel less than or uncomfortable in situations.
yeah,
And it really is telling yourself that you have these strengths
yeah,
and they're valuable. As an introvert, you can also feel strange about needing some time alone.
yeah,
So people might say you're a loner or aloof or lots of things, antisocial.
yeah,
And just realizing, what, sometimes I'm going to spend some time with people,
yeah,
and sometimes I need to take a break.
yeah, and
Like,
recharge. Yeah,
yeah, go into a conference.
yeah,
You might really be enjoying the conference, but there comes a point where you're feeling overwhelmed,
yeah,
and maybe it's just a walk around the grounds of that venue and just taking a minute. And there's a lot of people that don't feel comfortable with that. They
yeah,
feel weird if they're walking by themselves, but it might be just the medicine you need.
yeah,
So really accepting what you need. And it's never an excuse. It's never, introversion isn't holding you back from anything. You just need to understand who you are, what your strengths are, and maybe that time alone that you might need, or that preparation. Preparation is so key for us,
yeah,
to
yeah,
think ahead of time
yeah,
for certain things,
yeah.
and just accepting all that and realizing that you're not perfect and nobody else is either.
Yes, yes, yes. It's interesting, isn't it? That word shy. You think, well, who's calling who shy? It's like, would an introvert call an introvert shy? Probably not. And
Sometimes.
sometimes, yeah,
Sometimes introverts don't understand ourselves, and that
yeah,
can be a problem.
yeah,
That we're thinking somebody else is shy, but by the same measure that maybe we are too.
Yeah, but it
So
sounds like though we're talking about shyness as something that's like contemptuous or an insult, but often shyness can be quite endearing. Kind of, if someone's a little shy, it can be quite endearing and quite charming in its own way. Like it takes you a while to get to know them, to unfold them, unwrap them. And that can be really, for someone like me, I find that really interesting rather than someone that's just straight on a plate in front of you. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So I know exactly what we're saying here. Um, if you're happy with who you are, great.
yeah.
But it's the shy person that is too afraid to do things that they want to do.
Ah, okay,
That's where there's a problem.
okay.
When you lack confidence, like you want to talk to somebody and just for example, and you don't feel like you can because some way you feel like you're less than,
Yeah,
that's where it's a problem.
yeah.
Just being quiet, again, and like I said earlier, sometimes, I don't think I'm being quiet, but compared to somebody else,
Yes,
they're
yes.
going to perceive me that way.
Yeah,
And I've tried to run from that word. I've tried to run from the word quiet. I don't like if someone calls me quiet, but I I'm going to think a lot, and so sometimes I'm not going to be talking as much as
yeah.
as the extrovert.
Yeah, and it's so comparative to like quiet compared to what? I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's a good point you make about that shyness because you think, well, if I'm a little shy, I might not speak up for that new role at work. Whereas someone who's a little more confident might be speaking up for themselves a bit more, or applying for a role where the introvert could be like better qualified, but they're a bit shy to speak up, or like approaching a stranger, or like asking someone on a date or something like that. If you might, there could be really great opportunities you're missing out on because you're not getting all the treasures you deserve in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's when it's bad. It's when it's holding you back.
Yes.
But just as fact is needing some time alone,
Yeah. Yeah.
those are fine things. And I'm going to always use the word shy to mean that you're lacking confidence,
Yes.
and I'm going to use the word quiet. So I've accepted the word quiet for
Yeah.
myself. Quiet and Strong is the name of my website
Yeah. Yeah.
and podcast, and it's that I'm going to be thinking. I'm not afraid to speak up, but it's what do you want out of life? That's the question for everybody, and are they getting that?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
shy to me is you're being held back in some way.
Yeah. So, how did you arrive at quiet and strong for the business?
So I am in a strengths training at work.
Yeah.
I ended up in it was called Strengths Quest back then.
Yeah.
It's Strengths Finder now. It's called Clifton Strengths,
Yes.
and it's your 34 talents. And Marcus Buckingham was one of the ones that developed that instrument, like we were talking about him before.
Yes.
And it's your 34 themes of talent, and you are shown your top 5. And so I went through a lot of different trainings,
Yeah.
maybe 3 half days, 3 full days, lots of training like that. So I was in kind of a more advanced training, and it was 3 full days. And just like I'm talking, I'm thinking, I'm speaking a lot. I'm participating,
Yeah.
in the big group discussion and the table discussions. I'm just sharing all this stuff. And then after the 3 days was over,
Yeah.
the facilitator pulled me aside, and she was giving me a compliment.
Okay.
And she said, "You're quiet and strong, and when you speak, people listen."
Oh.
And so the name stuck, and that was then I named my website's named that, and then the podcast. But it's just kind of, and I think that's true for a lot of introverts,
Quiet and strong.
because
Yeah.
yeah, we're thinking, we're not sharing everything, and so we might not be talking throughout the whole meeting. Might be talking a lot more than us, but you've really worked on that idea in your head, and
Yeah.
it could really be a gem when it comes out, and so it's stuck.
It's stuck. I like it. I like quiet and strong. I just finally, Dave, I'm just curious about pessimism, and I'm wondering whether introverts are more likely to be pessimistic? Because when I think of the technical skill professionals I've worked with a lot, like I mentioned, the lawyers and the engineers and the accountants, they're overwhelmingly pessimistic, because you want a pessimistic engineer, right? You would someone that over-engineers the bridge, so it's not going to fall out. You want a pessimistic surgeon in lots of ways, because they're going to over-prepare and overstudy. You want a pessimistic lawyer, looking for problems, looking for reasons or things you need to avoid. So and I'm thinking the professions that tend to attract the introverts are also ones that appear to have like a more pessimistic explanatory style. Is that something that you've become aware of, or that you've thought about?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, definitely, I would say that we spend a lot of time in our heads.
Yeah.
So we can be more prone to overthinking.
Yes.
Which can definitely lead to anxiety. So I think we can. And of course, those things can happen to extroverts too.
Yeah.
But I think we can be more prone to that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about the pessimism, but if you're overthinking, that definitely can make you.
Yeah. You're overthinking, and you like that like going like an inch wide and a mile deep into something. I'm just, it'd be interesting to see if that does correlate. I was just curious about your experience on whether you've seen that. It seems like the extroverts appear a lot more optimistic. Like they talk in a big picture, and we can do this, and it's all that so-called big picture stuff, right? That and a bit of embellishment. I'll call it embellishment. Maybe like skirting around the truth, we can say.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking for myself, I am a big picture person.
Yeah.
As an introvert, I'm very intuitive. I am more optimistic and, look ahead to the future, but I do overthink, and that does cause anxiety. So
yeah,
there's definitely something to it where we spend more time in our heads.
Yeah, more time in our head.
But also spending more time in our heads, we can come up with some great visions for the future at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, because deep thinking doesn't mean necessarily detail thinking, right? Does it? It could be deep thinking about a big picture.
Yeah, there's both kinds of introverts. Some are more big picture, some are more details. And then there's lots of other nuances to our personalities.
Yeah. It's interesting. David, I could talk to you for hours. I love listening to your insights. I'm going to put it in the show notes to this podcast, your contact details, if people want to learn more about Quiet Strong, or they're interested in learning more about introversion and the sort of things that you do. But for now, David, thank you, sir. And I love your introverted, deep thinking insight.
Thank you, Peter. This has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it very much.
My pleasure.